get started. You guys are all here early. What I'd like to do today is share some ideas around developing 360-degree influence. Actually, this is a course I ran a couple times at the IE Business School a number of years ago. Sort of the trigger for this was my own study and sort of investigation into influence, because I found that our magnifier in life is how well we can influence others. And when I also learned some things too, because I was coaching the global executive MBA students for 8 years, 4 informally and 4 formally at the school. Now, these are very, very talented students, average age 35 or so. And I noticed one particular thing is the students that had, very, very successful in their roles, very high grades and everything, they're outperformers, were all very good at influencing, particularly influencing across, okay? But they were be able to influence in all different directions. So what I want to do is share some ideas with you. The first thing I want to share is that, think about this. If you're influencing up, bosses have to listen to you because you're helping them get their bonus. If you're influencing down, people have to listen to you because you're paying them. If you're influencing across, people don't necessarily have to listen to you. You need very good influencing skills to align them and to get them on your side and on your team, so to speak. So that means your peers, whenever you're in, especially if you're a large company, you have to influence your peers because that's where your power comes from. And then also, you have to influence customers or vendors. You have some influence over a vendor because you're paying them, but in all these ways, your power doesn't come necessarily influencing up and down. Your power comes from across. Because if you're always trying to get influence and leverage your boss's influence, they're not going to want to do that because they want to use their political capital and their influence for their own career. They don't want to come and band-aid your influence. So if I would give you any advice, I would always be working on your influencing skills from a personal development. And in fact, there's just unbelievable resources out there now that you can learn. I mean, when I started learning about communications and everything, the research around influence just wasn't at the level it is today. Okay, so keep in mind this: your real power is getting more and more people on your team. That means the ability to influence across is what's going to help you advance things, get more people on your team, driving alignment and so forth. So, keep that in mind. Of course, influencing up and down is important, but really influencing across, I found to be the key. And you really need good influencing skills if you're going to do that. So think about the first thing that you want to think about in terms of influence is, it's around building relationships. And I don't know if you know the story with Noah in the Bible, but Noah, he built the ark before it started raining. He didn't build it when it started raining. And so when you build relationships before you need them, because when you don't have a relationship and you want some influence, you want something from people, if you haven't built the relationship, they put the wall up. And now you have to bring the wall down before you engage them. So I found that the best bit of advice I ever got on influence was a former boss. He says, whenever you go into any new job, any new type of project, he said, make a list of all the key people who have an influence on your project and your decision-making. He said, start building a relationship from the very first day, because sometime during the job or the project, you're going to need something from them and help from them. And if you don't have a relationship, you're not going to get that help. The key thing here on anything relationships is, everybody has their own sort of best topic, and it's themselves. And everybody has a self-interest. So what you want to do is you want to wrap what you want inside what they want. And if you don't know what they want, or you don't know what their focus is, then you don't know how to align what you're after to what they're after. And I found the most important questions in terms of any type of linkage is to find what's most important for the other person. What's their focus? What is most important? Because you can always align what you're doing to what they're doing, and you're going to get more help along the way that way. So, keep in mind your power is in finding out the other person's focus, what's most important to them, and particularly why it's important to them. So if you understand that, you have the way to have some influence as well. But building relationships is more about how interested you are in them versus how interested they are in you that way too. So keep that in mind. Build the relationships before you need them. A great thing would do is create this list for your role that you're in today. What are all the key relationships around you that are critical for you? Just make the list. At the end of each week, scan the list and say, how am I doing? Have I talked to these people? Am I aligned? Do I know what their focus is? All you have to do is scan that, and it'll trigger at least 2 or 3 actions for you to take in order to build those relationships stronger. And because a lot of times when the relationships aren't in front of you, or you're not thinking of them, they get forgotten, and they're not strong when you need them, okay? So keep in mind this, it's about building relationships, build it before you need it, and always wrapping what you want inside what they want. Now, there's 2 key skills for communication in terms of influence. The first thing is that you're going to have more influence when they talk and you don't talk. Okay, and think about this too. Whatever we verbalize, we tend to take stronger ownership of, and we tend to take more action on what we verbalize too. So the power in influence is your questions. The more your questions are compelling, the more you get them involved and listening and talking, the more you're going to influence them. And think about this. If someone doesn't listen to you, how do you feel? You feel unimportant, you feel rejected, you feel frustrated. Listening values the other person. And when people feel valued, they're going to want to support you as well. So your power is in your questions. In fact, the number one thing I think about when I go into any meeting are what are the questions I need to ask to uncover what's most important to the other person, why it's important, and other things. When I was leading in Europe, I used to travel around to different subsidiaries, and I always asked the general manager of the subsidiary, who are your superstars? And often I'd like to buy them a lunch, a beer, or a dinner. And I happened to take the top salesperson out in one of the organizations and had him for a beer. And he said, I owe all my success in sales to one phrase. If the customer or prospect is talking, I'm winning. Right? They're selling themselves. If you ask the right questions, you will influence people. They'll influence themselves. And sometimes you can't, you have to share some things with people. And the best way to share information is through stories and examples. Because stories and examples are basically an experience. Your own life is an experience. Your memory is an experience. So whenever you tell a story or an example, often people's they'll jump to their own memory of a similar experience, and now you make it highly relevant. So stories and examples make it super relevant what you're saying very, very fast. Okay. And so if you give them a bunch of information, they have to kind of say, how is this organized? How would they use it to access their own memory and to make it more relevant? So what I found is the twins of very good influence are asking questions and sharing stories and examples. And the more you can do that, the better. Now, a lot of people say, should I share my own stories? Should I share other people's stories? Think about this. If you only share your own stories and examples, then people think you have a big ego. If you only share other people's stories and examples, people say, well, what do you know? Why should I listen to you? So you always need to use a combination of stories and examples to illustrate your points with others. But what I found, and I never forget what that salesperson said to me, when they're talking, I'm winning. It's the same everywhere in influence, right? And so if we had less people on here today, we have over 40 now, I would be making it very interactive because I want you guys to participate as well. So, keep in mind this with all your conversations. Your power is in the question. Because think about it. If I ask you, two people having a conversation, one person asks all the questions, the other person gives all the answers, who controls the conversation? And you would say probably questions. That's right. So when you're asking questions, you're in control of the conversation, which gives you more influence. And it's very interesting because if you're like a micromanager, as a manager, and all you do is answer your people's questions all day, that means they're in control of every conversation with you, which isn't very good. So questions put you in control of the conversations. Questions get other people speaking. Stories and examples make everything relevant fast. And the last thing with stories and examples is they're memorable. Think about it. If what you're trying to influence people is not memorable, they can't transfer it to other people. So, the more you use stories and examples, the more they can move and transfer that type of information onto others because you packaged it in a story or an example. So think about this. If you really want maximum influence, you got to reach the correct mind. Okay. Now, you see it on the screen here, but I often ask people, what percentage of what you do every day, your habits and behaviors, what you do every day and what people around you do every day, what percentage is driven by your conscious mind? And the other day I asked this question. I had answers like 20%, 50%, 70%. It's only 2 to 4%. Everything else is driven subconsciously. Okay. So, and I'll prove it to you with one single question. Can you tell me your next thought? You probably can't. It just pops up. So the thing about this is that if you think, which mind do I want to influence? Do I want to influence the conscious mind or do I want to influence the subconscious mind? And I found that the most powerful influencers are thinking of it this way. I'm trying to plant dominant thoughts in people and keep coming back and watering them. In other words, the more they're thinking about this, the more opportunities they're going to see. So take the example of when you have, if you have a number of you have children. And when you were pregnant or your partner was pregnant, the middle of the pregnancy with your first child, did you suddenly see more baby buggies everywhere? You didn't say to your partner in the morning, honey, let's go look for baby buggies. It was a dominant thought, unbelievable emotion. Your brain pointed it out. Just like when you buy a new car. You buy a new car, you're happy for about a week, and then you see your car everywhere, right? Whatever is a dominant thought, people see more of. So whenever you influence their dominant thoughts, they're going to take more action on those. And so in terms of leadership and in terms of getting people influence, this is magical often. And if you think about it, if I show you on the next slide here, it's really around focusing people, trying to create dominant thoughts in terms of where you're heading in the future or where you want to have occur, if you're leading people or whatever, so they see more opportunities. So whatever is a dominant thought for you, you will always see more of. I don't know if you've ever taken communication or influencing classes, but someone is teaching would say, could you see blue in the room, anywhere around this room? And suddenly you would see the blue in the room. And then finally, almost your mind would just be focusing on blue all the time. Or, sometimes the bad professors often say, can you hear the air conditioning in the room? And then you notice, you start hearing the air conditioning, and then suddenly your mind's focused on the air conditioning, and then you're not listening to the professor. So keep in mind this, is that you have to reach people's subconscious mind, which means that you have to have some influence on a dominant thought. You just can't say something once. You have to say it multiple times in different ways so that they're engaged. So think of it this way. I need to plant the thoughts, and I need to keep coming back and watering them. And what I found in my own leadership is whenever I think about what do I need my people to think about, at the time I plant, I'm also knowing how I'm going to go water it. In which ways am I going to communicate again and again this way? That's why stories and examples are a great way of watering a dominant thought, and just don't use the same stories over time. And don't say the same thing all the time. You know, I had one boss who always says, well, there's three things. And he always, there's three things, there's three things. Whenever you say the same thing all the time, people's mind says, well, I can forget it. He's going to say the same thing. And so, you know, you block it out. So if I say this, you know, successful communicators are consistently different. They're consistent in the message they want to get across, but they're delivering it in different ways, different stories and examples, and different ways that way. So keep in mind that concept. Reach the subconscious mind. Think about you're planting thoughts, and you're going to keep coming back and watering them so they stay top of mind. So, you know, think about for yourself, whenever you're reported to a boss, and if the boss, you know, occasionally every few days would say, how's the project going? Any issues? This and that. Yeah, we're trying to deliver this by, you know, the end of next month, and so forth. So if they're constantly asking questions about that, they're constantly keeping that top of mind on you, and now it becomes more important that way. That's why the best bosses will often ask questions in different ways about the same topic, but to keep it top of mind for you. In other words, keeping that thought planted, and that asking those questions is just watering it along the way. So I always say is that, you know, the subconscious mind is often impacted by repetition, you know, repeating the message in different ways, but it also is very impacted by the emotion. So whatever emotion you can put to what you're planting and watering, and make it really about them as much as you can, and reference them, reference stories and examples that link to their experiences, now it's going to be even more magical. Okay, so keep in mind subconscious, planting, watering, because it's a very powerful concept that way. And keep in mind the two fundamentals we talked about earlier: asking more questions, using more stories and examples. So when you think about influence, and you think about people's motivations and so forth, it's a good thing to remind yourself of these motivations when you need to influence people to do more. And I found that there's 4 motivators of people. Now, Daniel Pink says there's only 3. He says there's only relevance, power, and ego. And those are my words, but it's similar to him. He says money is not a motivator. And that could be true in some ways, but see, money is a motivator for what it will do for you. So if you don't have enough money for food, that's a big motivator, because you need to buy food to live. But, you know, let's take an example here. I'm a, successful salesperson. And let's say when I'm shaving in the morning or putting makeup on, man or woman, I'm looking at the boat I'm going to buy at the end of the year when I get my bonus, if I reach my bonus. Now, if I look at that boat every day, right, I'm equating the money with that boat, and I'm reaching my subconscious mind. I'm going to see more ways to make that happen. And that's where top salesmen are always taking a dollar number, and they're making something out of it, what they're going to use as a target that way. So money is an amplifier. So whatever you put money on, it's going to amplify people thinking about it, which means it's going to become more of a dominant thought. But if you give money to someone who doesn't know what they're going to do with it, it's not a motivator, because it's not reaching them. So it's a very powerful motivator. What I found in motivation, I didn't rely on money as a motivation. I relied on the others, but I used money when I had to amplify a motivation. So let's say I gave someone a big project to run. I put some money on the project, just a matter of amplifying the motivation behind it. But now you have 3 motivators of people: relevance, power, and ego. Relevance. Why should they care? Right? So, it's really, why should they care? What's the meaning for them? What I found, to make something relevant for people, make it very, very visible what they're going to do. Right? So let's say, take an example, like in leading, I have someone doing a major project. They need to deliver it in 2 months. I put their name in a presentation to big bosses. I describe what they're going to deliver in 2 months. I share with that person, here's what I said to the top bosses about you. That person cannot afford to fail because it was visible everywhere. Their reputation would be hit. But think of it another way. Relevance, if it's very visible and that person delivers a fantastic job, they're going to feel unbelievable pride. So, visibility is huge, but relevance, it's their purpose. So whenever you align something to people's purpose, it becomes highly relevant. But the second one there in terms of the Daniel Pink's is choice with its power. Think about it. If you have no choice, do you feel powerful or powerless? Probably powerless, right? So, choice, people feel when they have choice, they feel more powerful. They take more action. They're much more motivated. So whenever you're telling people to do something or you're forcing people to do something, they don't really are motivated to do it. But if you figure out a way that's their choice, or if you ask them, well, what options do you think we have? And you coach them towards better answers, they're going to take that. So what I found is when people have no choice, they're not motivated. And so your power there is asking them for options. In fact, that's one of the most powerful leadership questions. What options do you think we have, and what would work better than the other? And then last one is ego. People want to be recognized. They want to be recognized for two things. They want to be recognized if they're really good at something, right? They're very skillful and everything. And they want to be recognized for their achievements. And so, the more you recognize people and your sincere recognition, the better. And so, if you're just saying good job, great job and everything, or you don't give any examples why it was great or what thing you admired and what they did, that's kind of like false praise too. So what I found is that when you're recognizing people, give them a reason why you recognize them and why they did such a great job, or what you found in what they did was done really well, and so forth. So those are the 4 motivators I found. If you think about it, salespeople, commercial people, they're more motivated by money and ego, right? The internal people, they might not have a commercial number. They're supporting other organizations. They're more motivated by relevance and power. But, it's all a combination of those. And if you think about it, people's motivation change as their life changes, right? So they always say that people are the most motivated after their first child because now they need the bigger house. And so they really need to make a lot of money, and they got to do well to buy that bigger house. Okay. So, keep in mind this. There's a comment there about, manipulation and influence. And, a lot of times people would say, well, you could be manipulating people. But manipulation is interesting because the difference between manipulation and influence is only intent, right? The intent. If I'm manipulating, I'm only doing it for my benefit. If I'm influencing, I'm doing it for both our benefits. When I was teaching 360-degree Influence University, one student said to me, he goes, I think I don't want to learn this influencing techniques because I feel that I'm manipulating. But, if you're doing it for the intent of both, it's not manipulation, it's influence. And an example, one time I asked students, I said, what's the difference between these two? Influence and manipulation. And one of them said, I think manipulation is getting others to do something they don't want to do. Well, but that definition, were your parents manipulating you or influencing you when you were young? So, keep that in mind. Influence is people that are manipulating and influence are using the exact same skills and approaches. They're just doing it for a different purpose. Okay. So keep that in mind. Now, so 4 motivators. Now, a couple ideas for you in terms of how to improve your influence overall. And I don't know if you ever heard this expression, but you ever hear this expression in business? We need a meeting to discuss something, right? We need a meeting to discuss. Discussion is an activity. It's not an outcome. And I found that the most successful influencers will always set their meetings up in terms of the outcome. what we need to decide, what actions we need to agree, what alignment do we need. They're never setting their meetings as this is what we need to discuss, okay? Because if you're just setting as a discussion, you're not going to have a productive meeting. And if you don't have a productive meeting, you leave people feeling this was a waste of time. And think about this. If you're in a big company and you're known for running waste of time meetings, are other departments going to send their best people to your meeting or just who's available? So I found that the secret of getting high quality people coming to your meetings is to run very productive meetings. In other words, state up front, this is the decision we want to make, the action we want to take, agree in action. We need to get aligned on this so we take consistent action after the meeting. When I was leading international operations, I often had the person in this country on the conference call tell the person in this country to shut up. We don't have time for this, because they knew where I was trying to achieve by the end of the hour. They knew what I was trying to achieve. If you think about for this session, my outcome for this session for you guys is that you picked up something that will change your thinking about influence, or it's going to change a habit, a daily or a weekly habit, because that makes the biggest difference. So one thing you absolutely need to do is you have to prepare for meetings. If you're not prepared and you waste people's time, you're losing influence. And so what I found also is that you need to use the full power in the room. And I found if you want to really have good meetings, ask for ideas ahead of the meeting, and then start the meeting sharing everybody's ideas at the beginning. So, it's so important in that way, because you want to use the full brain power that's in the room. But if you're only using it through discussion, oftentimes you're only getting the extroverts talking, and the introverts have great ideas, but they're not saying anything. So I found the best way to have strong influence is to ask for ideas ahead of the meeting and start discussing it then. And if you really want to have power, when you share the ideas back to everybody, put people's names next to it, because everybody loves to see their idea, especially if people love it and your name's next to it and so forth. And also if they know their name's going to be next to it, they're going to put some investment in giving you good ideas versus just poor ideas. But the normal meetings are run this way. We spend 80% of the time getting all the ideas out of people's heads and 20% discussing it. So the better meeting is asking for input, spend 20% of the time getting the additional ideas out, and then 80% of the time discussing those ideas. Okay, so keep that in mind, and you have a very good idea where alignment is when you get the ideas ahead of time, and you can focus your conversations on what will make the most. But let me share this and repeat it again. Running poor meetings equals wasting people's time, and that means you're losing influence. So, don't take meetings lightly. Don't have them sneak up on you and say, well, what am I going to do here? Also, when you're doing one-on-one meetings with people, do your preparation before you show up. You're going to have a much more powerful discussion, and you're going to engage them much more. So that's the meeting aspect. Another thing I found with very, very successful influencers is they have the ability to be concise. Okay, they're able to communicate in fewer words, which means they allow other people to ask questions, and then they can ask questions on exactly what they would like to know, and then they leave much more satisfied because they know more about what they exactly want. But if you talk all the time and you don't allow people to have time to ask their questions, you're not going to have as much influence. In fact, presenting something is less powerful than answering a question on the same topic. So that's why I say is the most successful people will present less, and they'll reserve more time for questions. Okay, so keep in mind this. A good tip for you if you're running a meeting: always call on the person who's concise first, because they'll give a concise idea or description, and they'll set a pattern for everywhere else. If you call on the person who's long-winded, that sets a pattern and everybody else will give a long answer to things. Okay. So I would say whatever you can, try to be concise and force yourself to say things in as few words. In fact, if you write emails with less words, you share things with less words, think about this: you're saving people time. And less is more memorable than more, right? So if they get the idea with less words, they'll remember it. They'll also willing to pass it on to others because it's so short and so meaningful. They'll share it on, or they'll even use your own words in their own communications then too. Okay, so try to focus on growing your ability to be concise. The other concept to think about this in influence is right door, right floor. Okay, everybody's favorite topic is themselves. So you should start conversations with what they want, not what you want. So start the conversation in their self-interest. They want to have the conversation now because they're interested. Use the level of details and describe this in the level of details that they would like to have the conversation at. So example, let's say you're talking to your boss. Don't go to your boss just with what you want. Frame it in terms of what you're trying to deliver for them, and then talk it at a high level, because bosses want the summary. They don't want the absolute detail. Biggest problem that you have with the bosses is that you go in and you talk about what you want, and then you talk about the lowest level of detail that they're not interested in. They cut you off and you feel frustrated. So always think in conversations, right door, right floor. Right? They're what's most interesting for them because they're going to want to have the conversation. Talk at the level of details they would like to talk about. Now they want to continue the conversation. So right door gets them wanting to have the conversation. Right floor gets them wanting to continue the conversation. And then you can move the details up and down, but you always have to start where they're most comfortable with. Okay? So remember, right door, right floor. The other one too is a concept I want you to think about is, this is something I always ask myself recently too, is how far do you want your influence to travel? In other words, I'll give you an example. Let's say that you're trying to influence another department. You have a very good relationship. You know this person very well in the other department. So you go and you talk to them. And you can convince them very quickly, because you know them well, you have good, strong rapport. But they need to influence everybody else in the department to help you. So they might need extra information, extra stories and examples that they can use on to influence onward. It's the same way when you're trying to sell into a company. You might sell your point person and they agree, they love what your service is, but they need to go back and get management approval. But if you don't give them enough information, enough examples, enough to satisfy the questions of management, your influence stops. So I think what you want to ask yourself is often this: ask yourself, how far does my influence have to travel? And am I giving the person I'm talking to now enough ammunition to help that influence travel further? And especially if you're in sales and selling big projects, you know this very well. But if you're in any type of environment where you need your influence to go through an organization or through other people, you always have to think about what influence and what information, stories and examples, whatever, do I need to pass this on? Okay, so a great question to ask yourself, guys, is how far does this influence have to travel? And make sure you have the person armed with the right information for it to travel further. So a couple more things and then I'll open up for questions. The other thing is there's a tremendous, how would you say, influence you have when you ask for input or advice. Example, let's say that as a big project or whatever, I ask you for some input from ideas, how to do something. And then I use it and I show people and I say, I got this idea from you. Now, you might not even support the whole project, but you see now your idea as part of it. And now you're going to want to support it because you want your idea to be successful. It's the same way with asking for advice. Let's say you ask for someone who's higher than you for advice, someone who's successful already, and they give you some advice. Well, the first thing they're thinking is, I want my advice to be successful. So they're often going to help you with something in order to you make it happen as well. And you wouldn't believe the number of times when I asked for much more successful people than me for advice, and they always did one or two actions to help me along the same way too. So, there is unbelievable power in asking. Everybody loves to give their input because they feel, great at that. Everybody loves to give advice. Not everybody loves to take advice, but everybody loves to give it. So, you have tremendous power in asking. And if you use what the input they provide or the advice they give, and you give them credit, now they're going to support you like crazy. And this is unbelievable when you get people involved in projects, because sometimes I supported people and I didn't really support even the whole project, but I wanted my input to be successful. Okay. And the last thing here is, if you're leading any type of organization, the biggest influence you need is alignment and, playing positive politics. And what I found in my career, towards the end of my career, I was driving big changes and so forth. I was spending 80% of my focus on this alignment, keeping people aligned. So it's so important, because you need two types of alignment or collaboration. You need collaboration across your team into other departments or vendors, and you need alignment of management in terms of decision making so you can do what you need to do. And I used to call this alignment air cover, right? And so, as you see on the bottom there, don't fight a ground war. Don't have your people fight a ground war without air cover. And so our job often, whenever we're running big things or so forth, our job is to create alignment so our people can collaborate much more effectively. And the biggest thing of alignment is playing positive politics, which is building strong relationships and aligning your focus to the other person's focus. So if you really come back to where we started the afternoon on, it's really playing politics is understanding other people's focus and aligning your focus to theirs in ways that they're going to want to help you. So keep in mind this, is that you have to learn to love to play politics, but play it positively. Because think about it this way. If you don't have strong relationships across, and let's say that you drive, because of the lack of alignment, your people have to do extra work in your department that should be done elsewhere, they're not going to be happy. And also, if you don't have strong influence in your peers, they're looking at you as not a strong boss, but as a weak boss. And in fact, in big companies, often pay and bonuses are negotiated across the management team. So if your people are seeing that you don't have strong alignment and strong influence across your peers, they're thinking, this is hitting my wallet, and I'm not getting as paid as much as I should be. So keep in mind those ideas. So, it's a number of things, and when you get the materials here, you can take a look at each of the ideas. But think about what we talked about from the beginning: relationships, listening more, sharing more stories and examples, using the right door, right floor concepts. Okay. And if you give those basics, you're going to be unbelievable in much more power. And I'll tell you what, for me, I always keep in mind the listen and share. And I always keep in mind right door, right floor. Those are the fundamentals, because I think those are the fundamentals from which the conversations are working on. So for you guys, I have a couple resources. I studied all the influence gurus, including the most ethical internet marketers. So here's a influence factors cheat sheet for you guys. a reference for you that you can use in what you do and how you can influence people. It comes from the basics of the human needs. Okay, you know, what people want. And in fact, this is a very interesting one. If you think about it, we want two things at the top there. We want certainty and uncertainty, right? Certainty means we feel assured. But if everything is the same all the time, nothing's new, that's not good. That's why the lockdown is against our human needs, because we didn't have enough new things happening. So it's a great list of a combination there. And the other thing is here is a set of leadership behaviors. If you have a leadership role, every successful leader can lead themselves well. Every successful leader can influence others. And every successful leader can drive change. And the fundamentals there are really in the influence others, that part there. But if you think about it, influencing others magnifies your impact. Being able to drive change with that influence magnifies your legacy. And then keep in mind this for yourself. Do some reflection on what we talked today. So even at the end of the call, think about, what could I do differently? Do I need to change my thinking? Or do I need to change a habit? Because reflection is the opportunity to give yourself advice. Okay. And now I'll open it up for questions and answers. Let me try and stop the share here if I can, so I can see people. There we go. So I stopped the share. Now you can open it up. You can shout it out. Take on any questions, comments. Was this a valuable time for you guys?
Absolutely.
Great. Any questions that I can answer from the things I shared? So everybody's bashful now. You can type it in or you can shout it out.
Mark, it's
Yes.
not a question, it's more a comment.
Yep.
So the two things that stuck with me, which I am actually going to use going forward a lot more, the whole thing around listening, that let the other person talk.
Yes.
People like hearing themselves talk, and often the more you listen, the more information you actually get out of that person without necessarily asking 100,000 questions.
Right.
And the other part I really liked was the difference between manipulation and, was it influence?
Influence, yeah.
Yes, the whole thing that the difference is intent.
Yeah.
We had a like a sales training with some sales training last week, and we're battling to differentiate. We're like, okay, is manipulation viewed as positive or as negative? And we're like, it's such a fine line, but that intent is what actually defines it.
It's very fine line, very fine line. And let's say you have a poor character. Let's say you have a person has a poor character. Yes. Everything you do will be perceived as manipulation.
Manipulation, exactly.
Just because of the person's character. Let me ask you quick, everybody, and type into the chat function. Today, when I was doing the session, were you writing my exact words or were you paraphrasing words in your notes? Type into the chat function. Were you capturing exact words or paraphrasing? Diana says both. Ann says paraphrasing, combination, both. Yeah, paraphrase. A lot of you are paraphrasing. In business, you should not paraphrase your notes. If you want to have influence and someone else says something very important, write down the exact phrase that they use. Right? If you're working in an environment where English is a common language and everybody has maybe second language English, whatever, we're all educated different. We all express ourselves different. If I use a phrase and then when you can report back to me and you use your way back, you're forcing me to translate. So, in business, when I take notes, I only capture three things. I capture my commitments, because if I commit to do something, I need to do it. I capture other people's commitments to me. And the third thing I capture is exact words. because now I can put in an email back to them, their way of saying it. And what do they think? I listen. What are they? And then they're not having to translate back again. It's so important that way. So Antonio says, why do you believe in all that stuff you are sharing with all of us? Yeah. Why I believe it? Because it works. Okay. Think about this. If you grow your influencing skills, you become better, which means you use less time. If you use less time influencing, you have more time to enjoy life. So keep that in mind. It's very powerful. Okay. Any other comments or questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, I got stuck with the slide about the subconscious.
Yes.
Versus, so it was 2 to 4%, I think, the conscious.
Conscious.
Mind. And you're saying like to get through to the subconscious. So is there a way or something that you use to see what the other person is thinking?
Well, yeah, the other person, to get the other person expressing fully in themselves, you have to use words like, what do you feel? Right? And here's another interesting thing too, you know, them fully expressing. If you ask people, what do you think about something? Thinking has a connotation of a right and wrong answer. And so they're a little bit not sharing everything that's in their head. But if you ask people, well, how do you feel about this? Or what do you feel could be the possible solutions? A feeling is no right or wrong answer, so people are more expressive that way. So, you know, I'll give you an example for me in coaching. Often I do phone coaching and I don't have the video on and I'm taking notes. What I'm doing is I'm taking notes of the people's exact phrases and then I'm linking it and I'm circling 3 or 4 of them and I'm putting them back together again. So it's probably the first time they took those 3 ideas and heard them all in their head at the same time. Now that's magical influence. So again, if you want big influence on other people, it's using their words and not your words, which means you have to be a good listener. And it's not necessarily the first questions you're asking, it's the follow-up question. The follow-up question gets people to express more, and it also proves that you were listening. So when you ask good follow-up questions, it proves that you were listening and they go deeper into what they could share. But be careful of this. Don't use the word think, use the word feel, and people are much more open. Good question, yeah. Let me ask you guys a question. Type into the chat function. What's your most important takeaway from today's session? What are you going to do differently? What are you going to do? Are you going to think differently or habit? Type into the chat function so everybody can see what people are taking away. Okay? Be more concise. Listen. Questions? Listen. Yeah. Yep. One for air cover. Air cover is huge. Yeah. Be concise for the others to talk. Yeah. Present less, time for questions. I tell you, you know, it's underutilized. And you don't think you have time, but asking for input or asking for advice is one of the best ways to build a team around you for doing things. When I was very, very young, and I was my first job when I was 22, the big boss used to come around the office and he used to, you know, I don't know if you know Lifesavers, those little candies. He used to give a candy and he asked you a few questions. That was his idea. So whenever you got the candy, you know he was going to ask questions. But so, you know, as much as you can, focus on improving your influence or communication skills because you're going to magnify your impact. but also you're going to save more time in getting other people to do what you want them to do. But also, you're also going to appear more interested in others too, because you're going to ask better questions and so forth. And if I could just emphasize one thing, it's a basic habit. I didn't talk about it today too much, other than meetings, is do your preparation. Be prepared. Think about, what you need to ask. Think about what you're most interested to know about the other person. Do your preparation, because preparation drives performance in the moment. So look at all the sports stars. Look at all the top people in their sports, whatever. 99% of their life is preparation. Performance is just when they're on the field. Oftentimes we think in business and life is the performance, but we just don't invest time for the preparation. And so if you do some preparation ahead of time and you do it all the time, you get even faster at your preparation, which means you're going to have much more influence with others. Okay, any other questions, comments before we finish? We just have a few minutes left before the top of the hour.
Mark, I'm not sure, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, sorry, good afternoon. Thank you very much. Great presentation and great lesson. I would like to ask you just one thing. When you are not fluent on a certain language, right? Because I'm not a native English speaker, right?
Yep.
And when you say don't use the word feel, or use the word feel instead of the word think and so on, are there any tips that you can recommend, for people to tackle these kind of limitations, of language limitations that you might face? Because today everybody tries to communicate in English, and as you were saying, I should not paraphrase, and maybe one of good tip will be to use the statement that the other people told us. But when it comes to these soft terminologies and ways to put open questions, any suggestion, any guidance, any tip that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I should write an article on this, because see, what I'm sharing with you came from hundreds of sources. So I read so many different books. I listened to so many gurus and things like this, and I tried to pick the cream out of all the things I was learning. I think, especially if you're English second language, whatever, I think the best thing you can do is to capture those exact words, right? So if you're using other people's way of saying things, you're instantly getting a connection with them. And so that's I think is the most important. And I do this to this day. Once I learned this a number of years ago, and that's what helps me tremendously in coaching, because when I coach people, I'm not paraphrasing anything they say. I'm writing down exactly what they say. Yeah.
Thank you.
But maybe I'll write an article on some of the subtle the subtle influence tips. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, time for one last question. Anything else, guys? Guys and gals. Okay, so what I'd say is think about your own reflection. Think about how do I have to change my thinking? Because you change your mindset, it changes your habits. But think about, what you want to change either daily, weekly, on what you take away from today. But if I remind you on one thing, do your preparation. And if you only take a couple things away, remember, your power comes from other people when they're talking. So it's listening more than what you think is important, and using the right door, right floor. Because if you use the right door, right floor, people are going to have the conversation, and if you're using the right floor, they're going to continue the conversation. Okay. So thanks, guys. This is recorded. You'll get the recording, a link to the recording, and you'll get the handout and the materials in a couple hours from now. So thank you very much for being on, and wishing you a great remainder of your week. Thanks.
Thank you,
Mark.
Mark. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Mark.
Bye-bye,
Cheers.
Mark.
Bye.
Bye
Thank you very
bye.
much. Bye-bye.
Bye everyone.
There we go.